Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started.
Well, welcome back to the Bone. Today I have Marc Reichling from UCLA. We met through Black Belt Sports Medicine quite a few years ago when I was still a student. Not saying that he's old or anything, but we've crossed paths multiple times. I actually worked at UCLA for a short stint during COVID, which it was great actually working day to day with Marc. He's a great advocate for athletic training and has done so much for the UCLA program. Currently, he's the director of sports medicine. That's a year now that you've been doing that?
Just past a year in August. So a year and 2 months.
Yeah. Well, with that, he does some hiring for UCLA. So we're going to talk a little bit about negotiation strategies and how hiring works at a Division I level. But today we're primarily going to get onto how is the athletic training department at UCLA financed? And does this roll into other institutions across the country? So this would give us a better understanding of how money actually works and how maybe we can get paid more, or is the money actually really there to get paid more? So Marc's coming in from Los Angeles bright and early this morning. How's the weather out there?
Good. We just finished a heat wave last week, so we were still in like the 90s. Now we're in the phase of like early mornings is like 60, 50 degrees. And then by the afternoon, it's like 90 again. So we're in the you have to dress for two separate days, right? If you get here and you have a morning practice, you're bundled up. And then by the afternoon, you're sweating in a short sleeve shirt. So it's the weird phase right now of it's fall everywhere else, but here it's still weirdly summer.
Yeah. So with the athletic training operations, what is your favorite thing about what you do as an athletic trainer?
Yeah. So I think the thing that has always been a passion of mine about athletic training is truly the patient care aspect of it, right? The dealing with the postoperative case and kind of seeing them from day one to return to play. I think that's kind of everyone's favorite piece of it. When I moved to Amazon, that kind of got taken away a little bit. But it did kind of help me take a step back and go, man, just the complex problem solving we get to do on a daily basis, whether it's one patient or a system or approach on how we manage cases overall or philosophies or treatments. I think the complex problem solving is the thing that kind of fires me up right now.
Yeah. I definitely think people take that for granted sometimes. They think we're overworked and burnt out, but that's what keeps us going at the same time.
Right? Yeah, you can easily be stuck in a world where, everything's kind of outlined for you and you're just a piece of the system and you got a very strict standard operating procedure and, there's no wiggle room, and that's stifling. And that, can, I think, not necessarily lead to burnout, but it can kill your passion for the field. So it's a very delicate balance of how are you in an environment that pushes you and gives you kind of this autonomy and freedom to push the boundaries, but at the same time not get burnt out because you're working 60, 70 hours a week and you're in the world where a coach is calling you all the time. So you got to know what you want out of your situation and what that may or may not lead you into, both personally and professionally, right? Because if you go all in on your personal stuff, cool. Professional stuff can kind of take a backseat, or it could be vice versa. So you just have to know what you want.
Definitely. So we all know that UCLA is rolling in the dough over there in Beverly Hills. But How does the financial structure actually work at your institution, or what is your understanding of it? Obviously, it's different at every institution, but I wanted to get a background on how it works there.
Yeah, so everyone's a little bit different, right? I would say most of the Power Fives operate in the sense that um, the first layer you have to unpack is how much is the university supporting the athletics program, right? From student fees and just kind of a general budget standpoint, how much does the university give your school? Right. So for UCLA, like for our athletics budget overall, not just sports medicine, for all of athletics, I think it's 3% of our total funding comes from student fees and university support. So that means 97%, right? Upwards of, I don't know our exact revenues at the moment. I think we're like $120 million. So only $3 million of that is coming from campus.
Mm.
Everything else is coming from multimedia rights deals, right? TV deals for football, basketball, and things like that. And then also ticket sales, apparel, and everything else that falls into that. Obviously, there's always a donor element of that. I couldn't tell you our exact proportions, but I think that's the first layer you have to unpack. For us specifically, right, it's 3% from the university, but every school kind of varies. Some schools could be upwards of 10%. I think mid-majors, right, it's obviously a bigger piece of the pie is they're not getting TV deals from ESPN or a Big Ten conference. So most of their funding is coming from student fees, which may go up each and every year or may get voted against, and then their funding is stagnant. So for us specifically, it's kind of a culmination of TV deals, multimedia rights, revenue from ticket sales, and then donor support.
Do you kind of have a round number of how much that's pulling in, or an estimate maybe for the department?
Of just our like net revenue for the department?
Yeah.
I want to say 2023 was around 120 million.
Okay.
Right. What's interesting, so I was here from 2014 to 2021. I'm going to have to do this like 5 times because my light turns off in my office. So in 2021, when I left, right, our Pac-12 deal was kind of going south. We were obviously kind of still in the middle of COVID. Our Under Armour deal was kind of going south as well. So the landscape was very interesting in terms of what did the future kind of look like. Obviously now with the Big Ten, that multimedia rights deal is almost double what the Pac-12 is, right? So we're talking upwards between $60 to $75 million a year just from the Big Ten multimedia rights deal. Ticket sales vary anywhere from, $10 to $20 million a year, depending on how good sports are. But I think our 2023 revenues were somewhere between 110 to 130 million. Yeah.
Good chunk of change.
Yeah.
But where is all that money going?
Right. Good question. So when you look at like the expenditures of the department, and right, the good thing about public institutions is everything's public record, right? So all of this is extensively reported on hey, 50% of it is going to staff salaries, coaches' salaries, and kind of just the natural inherent infrastructure. A huge percent of that goes to travel, right? Charter flights for football and basketball and being able to make all these cross-country trips and hotels and meals. Over, I would say the past 6 years, there's been a huge uptick in the amount of money we spend in nutrition, right? We went from spending, I think, maybe $1 million a year to almost $8 million a year in nutrition, right? So some of that goes with what the NCAA allows you to do. And some of that is also just what the department is perceiving as valuable. Like I had this conversation with someone the other day. When I started in 2014, the NCAA rules didn't allow us to give athletes a bagel with cream cheese because that constituted a meal. Now we're at the point where they're getting a full catered breakfast on a daily basis. So like just the landscape of the rules has changed exponentially, and that everything just changes year to year, right? Coaches' salaries kind of go up because that's kind of the market value of things. Travel expenses go up with us significantly going to the Big Ten and stuff like that. So there's so much fluctuation in what things cost that I think no one's truly grasped like okay, what's normal? There is no normal in college sports, right? What Alabama spends versus what we spend, wildly different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, and then I was just reading up last night about the NCAA providing more regulations on mental health. I mean, obviously, you guys already have a team there established, but I mean, there's going to probably be more need for it. So that's obviously more cost coming out with regulations and stuff. So, we're providing a better environment, but there is a cost to it too. And I don't think a lot of people realize that by checking the boxes, the bank account gets drained a little bit more.
Yeah, 100%, right? As you can, once you have the ability to offer more resources and the NCAA allows you to,
Mm-hmm.
like most schools do it, right? If you have the bandwidth to pay for it and the NCAA lets you do it, schools are going to do it,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's very few schools that turn a net like profit and are just filling bank accounts and giving out bonuses. Like that's not how things work, right?
Yeah.
Alabama and schools like that are in the Power Five that are profitable, are taking that money, building newer facilities with better resources, giving more resources to Olympic sports that may not be generating the revenue, but now we can, hey, let's build a new facility for men's soccer, or let's upgrade the existing facilities they have. So
Mm-hmm.
I always think that's the interesting part, right? When you look at the numbers of what the NCAA brings in or what schools bring in, that's one thing, but it's not, there's not a CEO at the top that's just pocketing all these things. I'm sure you can get into coaches' salaries and discrepancies and stuff, but at the end of the day, most departments are not, just filling bank accounts.
Yeah. So you had mentioned donors. Do donors get to dictate where their money goes, or do you guys have kind of a slush fund, or does it go to a specific sport, I guess, and then kind of gets pushed around?
Yeah. So donors have the ability to earmark where they want their funds to go, whether it's a sport or an initiative or a project or a facility. Um, so I do know they have the ability to do that outside of, donors that just donate just to donate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that gets dispersed, if it just goes into a general fund and kind of whatever our current needs are. But the first and foremost thing is if someone's willing to donate, they have the ability to earmark where they want it to go. If they're saying, hey, I'm just going to give a gift of $1,500 every year until I, retire or until I can't afford it anymore, that money just may go into a general fund that goes to operating expenses or repairs or upgrades.
Okay. So obviously we need to be nicer to the student athletes so that they funnel money towards the athletic trainers, right?
Yeah, right. It's funny, we're at the front lines, right? We can build that relationship, and obviously, if you have an athlete that has had multiple surgeries and sees all the work you do, they might come back and say, hey, I really want to earmark this money for sports medicine or athletic training and sponsor a new training room or something like that. So I think the more we can obviously provide a good service, but our intent isn't necessarily to hope that they make it to an NFL and get a big contract and buy me a new office or something like that.
Yeah. So with your partnership with UCLA Health, do they provide a sponsorship, or is that an automatic partnership because of your relationship through the school?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, right? Them being affiliated with us, obviously, all of their doctors are our team doctors. So just from a resources standpoint on utilizing the med center and utilizing the doctors, obviously they do get some built-in marketing with the deal, right? I don't sit at the negotiation table on how the contract gets negotiated between UCLA Health and UCLA Athletics. At the end of the day, we're one entity, so we're kind of just trying to do what's best for UCLA as a whole. But there's some built-in structure of, hey, the doctors are going to be at all of the games and serve this many hours per week. With that, the UCLA Health logo is going to go up in Poly Pavilion during games. It's going to go on the field at football games. So there's elements of that. But at the end of the day, our team physicians work for the hospital, and they're super accessible to us when we need them to help facilitate care and things like that.
Okay. So does any of that sponsorship money go directly towards the sports medicine department, or does that kind of go in the general funding, I guess, would you say? Or do you not know? That can always be the
Don't
answer.
necessarily know, right? I think it's kind of more of a one-way street, right? UCLA Health is not paying us; we are paying UCLA Health,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of the other way around, where it's, hey, how much can we provide financially to UCLA Health to get the resources we need in terms of, hey, we need 8 orthopedic surgeons to cover all of our teams. We need 12 primary care doctors, and we need to be able to cover XYZ. So it's kind of not necessarily, I think the money aspect of it is interesting. It's more so, hey, can we offset a physician's salary so that he can provide X amount of hours in the training room and travel with the basketball or football program? And it works out for both parties. I don't think either party is sitting there and saying, hey, we're netting a profit on this, and that's going to go towards a new doctor's office or a new rehab facility or something like that.
Yeah. So working with your budget that the athletics department gives you, how do you, how do you split up the funding and into paying the athletic trainers and, budgeting for supplies? Or I'm sure that the teams cover the cost to travel your sports medicine team. How does that kind of all work out?
Yeah, so it's an interesting process, right? Because at the end of the day, we are a state-run institution, so we still have to follow within the UC guidelines of salary requirements and job classifications and salary ranges and things like that. But when it comes to my role and what I have to do, right, it's discussing with our CFO and saying, hey, what is our budget going from this year to next year? Reviewing that, see what we've done year over year on how things actually cost in terms of supplies, operating expenses, and medical expenses that we incur year over year, and then kind of give them a forecast of like, hey, we've kind of been going up, or these are the areas we can control, or with adding an additional staff, right? This is what it looks like from a continuing education perspective, from a supply perspective, from an office perspective. So being able to forecast what that looks like and then partner with our CFO and our other administrators to say, this is what we're going to kind of need. And then obviously seeing what's possible and then working backwards from there.
Yeah. So obviously working Division I football or basketball requires maybe a little bit more than some of the Olympic sports. Not saying that you guys are withholding care or anything, but are there different scales on how you pay those different positions or any other benefits that they might get?
Yeah, so that's something that I think is slowly starting to evolve the more the college landscape kind of changes. I would say 10 years ago when I was here, none of that was a consideration, right? It was everyone's an athletic trainer. Some people work a little bit more hours, but maybe the help and resources you have is a little bit more extensive, right? There's 3 athletic trainers on football. So that way, if one of you's out, there's still 2 other people to cover versus there's 1 person for women's soccer. You're the person that's getting the phone call. You're the person that's handling everything. So I think those are kind of some pluses and minuses. So I'd say in the past, we didn't quite have that. Now with the landscape changing, we're trending towards making some of those changes. And I think every institution, at least in the Power 5, is kind of getting there. But with the uncertainty, it's really, really hard to plan when we don't know what's going to happen to the college landscape in general. But I think not just from a UCLA perspective, but from a Division I perspective, like everyone now realizes football and basketball obviously make the most money. Football and basketball obviously have the most visibility. Football, basketball also inherent the most risk from who's potentially going to file a lawsuit as a student athlete. Not saying, poor care can lead to a lawsuit in any other sport, but having the visibility that the 2 primary sports do carries some risk with that. The hours that's required to cover a football team should carry some additional value on the athletic trainer standpoint. And And then now when we get into this revenue sharing model, it's going to be even interesting because football and men's basketball, those are the ones that primarily get the revenue sharing. So now the school's investing or spending much more money to revenue share with those athletes. The resources they provide, whether it's the athletic trainer or the strength coach, should match how much money you're investing in the student athletes. So it's the next 1 to 5 years is going to get very interesting, not just from a collegiate model, but then how does the sports medicine model change or adapt to live within that?
Yeah. Well, I was also wondering, I mean, I think some of your athletes already have private healthcare providers or performance coaches and stuff. How have you guys been navigating that so far, and how are you going to navigate that when it's going to, triple in how many athletes are going to have outside providers?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say like a small percentage of our athletes kind of have an outside provider. It's definitely an exception to the rule. Where it gets interesting is, athletes that are international that maybe have only been like transferred here and are only going to be here for a year, right? They may want to keep their orthopedic they have back at home. So it's kind of just, hey, we got to build a partnership with anyone that's potentially providing care to our athletes. But the second piece is if they're on our roster, we're liable for what's happening. So at the end of the day, we're the ones making the decisions related to their injury and clearance status. But we do have athletes that, their sport model, right? Let's say a women's soccer where there's a bunch of national team players or players that go home over summer. So they're not here for 3 months. They're probably going to have to transition to a PT if they're recovering from an injury. So it's making sure we can partner with whoever we need to partner. Because at the end of the day, getting the student athlete the care is what's needed. I don't think we've crossed the threshold of private performance coaches yet. But I do see some of that potentially happening, but it's like the pro model, right?
Yeah.
Professional athletes, they still have the athletic trainers for their team. They might just also have an athletic trainer that is on call for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that still operates within the system, but is more one-on-one versus, hey, I might have to kind of wait in line for these other guys to get taken care of before the team athletic trainer for my NFL team can take care of me. That's more of a convenience thing at the professional level, or a continuity thing, right? Because they might be getting traded every other year. So that's a continuity piece of managing their care and not just whoever's negotiating their contract for that 1 year status.
Yeah. So do you guys have to do more legal on your side with this NIL revenue share stuff to make sure that the athlete understands how, like, you guys are on the line ultimately for if they play for a UCLA sponsored event and all that?
We don't have to do more legal. I think our paperwork that they sign when they come here in terms of what our medical services provide and what our limitations are is pretty transparent. But it's more educating them, right? Of, hey, you're under our care. Yes, your PT at home or your physician back home says you're cleared. That's great. I hear that, but here's our concerns. So now if I'm going to let you practice, right, have you met our criteria to clear you for practice versus your physician back home said, yeah, once you hit the 4-month mark, you're good. Okay, but we're liable. So it's kind of trying to meet in the middle and just educate them on, that's why it's easier to always go through us, right? That's why most people, I think, don't go to an outside provider, because it muddies the water. It's hard to get in communication. Like our doctors, I can pick up my phone right now and call our orthopedic surgeon and ask him, hey, this is what's kind of going on. What should we do? If it's an outside provider, it might take me a couple days to get in contact with that person. And then getting them on a meeting with me, the strength coach, and the nutritionist to talk through a complex case, that might take a week and a half to schedule. And then they're missing context about what the practice plan is. So it gets very difficult to manage outside providers if that happens here. So usually we educate the athlete up front of, this is why we recommend you staying in-house. It makes your life exponentially easier.
Check out clinicallypressed.org/courses for access to free CEUs for athletic trainers. Register and enroll in as many CEUs as you'd like. New CEUs coming on a monthly basis, including from your host of To the Bone with Shelby Daly. Get ahead of your CEUs by listening to podcasts and getting credit for it. Clinically Pressed Company, making complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org.
Yeah. So going back to you talking with the CFO and how the budget is divided for like pay, how do you convince them about, the market rate for athletic trainers, or what are the themes of increasing pay and all that? How does that conversation usually go?
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted, right? Not just here specifically, but any employer you're working with, right? You have to know the landscape you're in, right? So kind of like I said earlier, for us being a state-run institution, it's on me to learn the rules around the UC pay structure and job classifications and exactly what that means. And then also do my due diligence on, okay, what is Berkeley doing? What are all of their athletic trainers classified as from an HR perspective? And what have they been paying? Okay. Now comparing that to what we've been paying, because that's a pretty apples to apples comparison. UC school, Division I in California. And then kind of just trying to do a gap analysis between what are similar institutions paying, what's the market rate from an NATA perspective for Division I, what's the LA market rate, and kind of just come up with, hey, here's our gaps and relative to what factors, right? And making sure our decision makers are aware of, you can look at this thing a million different ways, right? I can compare this to just average salaries for college educated people in LA and get one number. I can compare our salary to Division I athletic trainers from an NATA salary perspective, and that's a totally different number. I can look at community college athletic trainers. That's a different number. So like trying to come up with what is the best comparison and illustrate what our gaps or what our strengths are, and then trying to meet in the middle of, okay, this is where I think we should be. What are we actually able to do and sustain year over year? And also make it so it's not the next person I hire is in a great position, but the 12 people before them are in a horrible position because now there's a big gap that I have to fix. So it's, when you solve a problem, you don't want to create more problems. So it's making sure you're not ignoring blind spots or saying, hey, I'm going to fix the next position we hire by building this great argument. That's cool for that one person, but is it sustainable? And can I spill that over across the whole staff?
Yeah. Well, how many staff members do you guys have again?
Oh man, it changes. Off the top of my head, we're at 16 athletic trainers on the Olympic sports side, 3 athletic trainers on the football side. We have 1 PT on the football staff and 2 physical therapists on the Olympic sports side.
So about 22 people you're negotiating for.
Yeah.
Well, that's where it's always interesting, is I think most people in negotiations see it as like a 3 to 5 kind of team that they're trying to push for, where some of these institutions where you're basically at 25 people, and that's a big budget to maintain ultimately. And how do you do it fairly? Because should the new kid that comes in that's newly certified be paid, how much you're getting paid for being there for 10 years almost now? So how does that kind of work with the experience or education portion of it? Do you guys usually calculate that into it, or does that overly complicate it?
It's a little bit of both, right? Because I think what you've seen in college athletics in general over the past couple of years is like this obviously mass exodus of athletic trainers going to industrial and things like that, which has kind of created awareness around salary and market values and other opportunities that athletic trainers now have. And they can say, hey, I don't need to be at this Division I institution. I can go to Amazon, work 40 hours a week, and make 20% more. So I think it's twofold, right? We definitely are cognizant of years of experience relative to salary range. But at the same time, like when we're fixing big problems, there inherently is going to be some, I don't want to say unfairness. Unfairness is not the word, but it's not going to be perfect, right? I might be able to create a little bit of a gap between someone that has 0 to 5 years experience and then someone that has 5 to 20 years experience. Like I can create a system where those two are paid differently. But at the end of the day, like me sitting here now, I would be extremely upset knowing what an entry-level athletic trainer makes now versus what I made working football, having 7 years experience 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So it's all relative. So you can fix the problems and make general progress, but it's not going to be perfect. Right. One person that gets a new position is 20% higher than it was 3 years ago. That doesn't mean this person that's been here for 10 years is also getting 20% of a raise either. So the hard part is everything is so relative, and you have to take everything in consideration and kind of make incremental progress on all of the areas.
Yeah. So with that experience portion of it, would you say that with UCLA and now the revenue share and, how high profile UCLA is, when you're hiring, would you say that there's a preference to sports specialization or an experience portion to it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's something we've gone back and forth on in years past. I believe we were kind of looking at sports specialization because when we were, when it was a level playing field, right? And volleyball and tennis and football are all kind of getting paid the same, then it's came down to the athletic trainer. Like, what's your preference? What do you want to work? Because you're going to get paid the same either way. Nowadays, I think sports specialization is an element of it, right? But I don't think it's our deciding factor on hiring, right? I do think me saying, hey, you've only ever worked tennis, water polo, swim, and dive, but now you're applying for my open football position, right? From an expectation standpoint, that is wildly different from the acute care injuries you're going to see, the hours, or the just general clinical management. It's going to be wildly different. So I think if you have a little bit of experience and exposure to certain things, that's okay. You don't have to have 8 years basketball experience to come in and take over our basketball position. That's not, I don't think that's the landscape anymore. I believe that's probably what it used to be. Now it's from an expectation standpoint, like, do you know what you're getting into? Right? The clinical side and the experience to make medical decisions and manage complex cases and relationships, right? Can you deal with a difficult coach? Can you have those difficult conversations with the doctor, with the athlete, with the coach and administration? That's more valuable than having direct sport experience, in my opinion.
How would somebody showcase those type of, I don't even know if those would be soft skills technically, but how could you feel out if somebody had those type of experiences?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two layers to that, right? I think the more we can see individuals that have a multitude of experiences, right? So they've worked at a community college, a Division I, they've worked at, 2 to 3 different places and have seen different styles and how things have gone, and have potentially worked within 3 different structures, whether that's the same institution or not, right? Hey, I've worked with one coach that was super easy to get along with. I then worked another sport that was very difficult to manage the cases and the relationship with the coach. So you can see a little bit from the resume of just what's your variety of exposures and time you've had in that, right? Are you bouncing around every 6 months where by the time you really hit the ground and start running, like you're out and on to the next place? That doesn't help. Like, have you been somewhere for a couple of years where you can see the general trends and kind of make progress? And then the second piece is in an interview, right? We're going to ask questions about, tell me about a difficult case you've managed, or tell me about when coach is yelling at you about XYZ, how do you manage that? Or us giving you a scenario that you're going to have to talk through. right? There's this hamstring case that, explain your return to play process, right? That's going to be clinical, but then we're going to throw curveballs in that scenario and say, okay, now what if coach comes to you and says this? What if the athlete does this? Most of the time, these are based off of like real things that we've seen happen, but seeing someone be able to answer in an interview these real life situations, because they're going to come at you. You're not going to have time to plan for this. The coach is going to walk into your office or call you, and you're going to have to answer the question on the spot. Yeah. So in the interview, we try and treat it the same way of, can you answer this? Or you're going to be caught on your heels, and then now the coach kind of has you up against the wall, or the athlete has you up against the wall.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess once you make it past the interview process and you are offered, is there room to negotiate for an athletic trainer at your school? I know that sometimes there's a range that everybody's trying to fit into, but how would an athletic trainer negotiate the higher range of that money effectively? Is there ways to do that, or is there, you're going to be offered one number and that's kind of it?
Yeah. I think the good thing about California, right, is California makes everyone now post like what the range is and what the actual budgeted expected range is, right? Mm-hmm. So the UC system, and I think the Cal State system does this too, where they're going to post the job classification that gives you the very bottom and the very top, right? Someone may never reach the very top. Most people are kind of in the middle of that entire band, but then they're going to list a second number usually. And if they haven't listed it, you can definitely, I would ask what the budgeted hiring range is, not what the salary range is, because the salary range is the big band. But what's the budgeted hiring range? That's a totally different band, right? Yeah. So I think knowing those numbers, A, is super helpful. But then B, like me being on both ends of, hey, formerly I was assistant here. I went to Amazon, went through their process, and then kind of came back. And now as like a hiring manager, knowing the differences between a new position versus an old position, right? Are we backfilling a role, or is this an entirely new role, right? Those are two different things. Generally, if we're creating a new role, it's probably taken a long time to get this position approved, right? We've had to demonstrate the need for another physical therapist or athletic trainer. So I've gone back and forth with the administration on demonstrating the need and the gaps we have and how this position is going to provide value, and then proposing budgeted salaries, and then them giving me, okay, we're going to approve it, but here's your number. Yeah. And that might not be what I want, but in order to get the position approved, that's what we had to agree upon. So at the end of the day, there's always some wiggle room anywhere you go. But I would always tell you, it's definitely not much.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of where do you have leverage, right? When I was at Amazon, I had a ton of leverage. I could walk away from the job, the first job that they offered me. I waited 6 months before I gave them an answer, and they kept just upping the offer, right? Because I had leverage. They wanted me to fill that role. Here or other D1 schools, right? People don't generally have leverage. They're going to go, who's next in line that will take this job with the salary we're offering and our timeline. Can you start in 3 weeks when the season starts?
Yeah.
So I would always say there's, the worst you're going to get is no. But the more you can provide a robust argument of, hey, this is where I think you're deficient, your department or your salary range, right? Here's some comparable positions that are in the area. Here's why I feel I should be paid more based off of experience or the job description. I am all for people providing as much data and metrics as they can, because maybe we have a blind spot, or maybe now I can take that to my administration and say, hey, I told you guys, I think this salary range was too low and we weren't going to get who we wanted. Our top candidate or our top 3 candidates all declined, and here's the reasons.
Yeah.
And that might make them reconsider and say, oh, I understand. Okay, now we're going to up this offer.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's been one of the debates that I've been trying to bring to light, and I'm sure other people have seen it, is there are the athletic trainers that are the organization chasers, and that's been the struggle with the salary debate. Is there's a lot of athletic trainers that have their, the place they want to be, and they're going to accept that number, whatever it is, and that's what pulls down the market. So it's, having the cojones to say no, I guess, and wait it out. But you have to realize that there might be somebody behind you that's going to say yes to that number.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I think athletic trainers, you know, obviously we're all for increasing salaries, right? I don't think there's an athletic trainer I've met that's like, yeah, no, this isn't a number one priority. That's everyone's number one priority. But the second piece of that is you have to evaluate personally and professionally, where does this align with where I want to be, right? Yes,
Yep.
maybe it is the organization I want to be with, but also maybe it's being in a D1 setting is going to give me the practice reps to be an expert clinician so that 5 years from now, I can leave that place and go work for a PT clinic. I can go work at the professional level, right? What's your overall goal? If your goal is to get really good at your clinical skills, okay, maybe the salary doesn't necessarily matter at this point,
Yep.
right? Personally, my crossroads was during COVID. When I decided to leave, I felt like I had to make some personal life choices that were going to set me and my family up for better living. And I kind of had to put my professional career on the back burner. At the end of the day, like 3 years later, I'm like, man, that was probably the best decision I ever made. But at the moment, I had to shift what my personal priorities were from what I wanted out of my career versus what I wanted my family or financial situation to be.
Exactly. It's that opportunity cost it's going to help us, but hold us back at the same time. Like, there's no getting around that because, I mean, you're out in the desert and are commuting, but I'm sure they made it worth it at the same time. But when you were out there working for Amazon, it was probably a 15-minute, 30-minute commute for you from your new house and all that. So, I don't know.
Yeah. I went from doing 7 years of a 35-mile commute to 1 year of doing a 5-mile commute that took me 10 minutes to then a year of a hybrid remote position with Amazon, which was like absolutely game changing for an athletic trainer of like, wait, I can kind of work from home when I see fit and only travel when I'm kind of needed. To me, that was like fantasy land, right?
Yeah.
But at the time, that's what made the most sense. That's what fit what I wanted to do. But then at the end of the day, at the end of those 2 years, I also had to look up and see the writing on the wall. Like, what's my trajectory here at Amazon? What's Amazon doing, and where might I fit in? And that's where I kind of got scared and was like, I don't know. This doesn't look like it's going to fit me from a trajectory standpoint. And the first time I left UCLA, I was like, this isn't going to fit me as a trajectory standpoint. And then now looking at UCLA again a year ago when I took this role was, hey, the trajectory and the landscape has completely changed. That changes what I potentially want to do. So it's not having your head in the sand, but looking up and not being naive to the environment you're in and what the landscape or trajectory for that institution or your role or job description might change year over year.
Yeah. And that's kind of the question I've posed also is, well, are we actually just working jobs or are we actually working towards a career? There's kind of a safety aspect of a job where a career, there's a little bit more risk of, taking the chances and making some moves and stuff to better yourself. And where do you ultimately want to be? I think job is day to day, where a career, you're looking at the next 3 to 5 years, even though that seems weird now after COVID, but
yeah,
where do you actually want to be and actually accomplish, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I just had one more question about, so how can somebody negotiate a performance package of qualifying for raises or increases or, some other ways of making sure that they're increasing their pay after they're hired? Do you guys have opportunities like that?
Yeah. So like we never get an outline of like, hey, here's the money that's allotted to performance or merit increases or stuff like that. At the end of a year, we make our proposals based off performance evaluations of what we feel keeping someone for retention or performance might look like. And then administration kind of gets to decide, hey, we can do this, we can't do that, right? So we have to be the ones that outline what that looks like. I think what I learned at Amazon and have been able to kind of bring to UCLA is, how do we base this off of metrics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Amazon, what I loved about being there was they measure everything, right? There's a million ways to look at data and splice that and get super granular and see the impact an athletic trainer is making, or the safety team that they're a part of, like what are they doing? But they were able to get granular enough to say, okay, from a performance standpoint, these people were more productive or more effective than these people. And then they had a structure, a system of evaluation that made it less subjective and more objective on the front of, hey, this is kind of where the cards line out. Does that match everyone's performance evaluations from their direct manager? Yes, it does. Okay. So that means everyone in this top tier gets a 7% raise. The next tier is 5%. The next tier is like 2%. So it's very, very structured that you would at least know your year over year trajectory there. And I think that's something we're trying to build out here. So it's less subjective.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah. The hard part is, what do you measure, right? In our world, that's a totally different probably podcast episode, but it's, what do you measure, right? You can't measure injury rates team over team. That's not fair to the athletic trainer.
Yeah.
You measure return timelines. I don't know. That's not necessarily fair either. So like, we have some things that I think we're looking at this year that I won't tell, because I don't want anyone to know what I'm looking at. So they try and like cater to that metric. We have some things that I think are going to be metrics that are actually a secondary byproduct of what we fixed. And hopefully that paints the story of performance and adherence to our structure.
Yeah. Well, I know that's what I was excited about working with you at UCLA, was we got to, roll some ideas around with how to structure an actual prevention exam, but a functional exam, and the different layers of that. And that was super exciting, having that opportunity to work with you on that. Not that we got super far, because 6 months went by so fast, but
Yeah.
it definitely was fun having the ability at UCLA to work with that and try to implement it in some pieces. So it'll be cool to see what you got, and let me know when you get it up and running, and we'll talk about it more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a few closeout questions. What are the trends that you're excited about in athletic training right now?
Yeah. To me, like, technology is starting to change the game a little bit, obviously, across multiple fronts. I think when you look at what we were doing as athletic trainers 10 years ago to what we're doing now, clinically is wildly different, right? SFMA to DNS to PRI, like all of these things have now spilled into athletic training the way they should have a long time ago. That's probably also a separate topic, but 10 years ago, like me and you were having conversations about DNS and SFMA that I think only 5% of athletic trainers were actually in the mix on those things.
Yeah.
So clinically, I think that part is pretty cool. But now technology is getting to the point where us being able to measure effectiveness, right, whether it's through motion capture systems or some of the eye tracking software out there right now, or even just like Power BI and Excel sheets and different dashboards. Like our EMR dashboard has the capability to measure some things that we weren't thinking about 10 years ago.
Yep.
So to me, technology can now do two things. It can really help us measure our effectiveness in terms of clinical care and impact, but then also hold us accountable, right?
Yep.
To where I'm doing these rapid or these repeat assessments, and is my clinical care working from a validation standpoint, whether that's a force plate thing or a dynamometer thing or a motion capture system thing. I can now hold myself accountable as a clinician to see, am I making the progress that my eyes are telling me?
Yeah. Well, and I think it makes it efficient time-wise also. And I don't think we're taking advantage of that fully just yet either. So yeah, that will be very interesting. So yeah, when you get your program up and running, I want to hear how it all runs with the technology.
We got some real cool stuff, I think, in the works. And we spent a year building the framework and philosophies that we want to adhere to and how we're going to approach things. And now the measurement piece is going to hit the ground next. And I think it's going to be super exciting.
Perfect. And then how would you define athletic training in 3 words?
3 words. Oof. Okay. So 3 words. I'm pretty sure this is 1 word, but frontline.
Okay.
Right. We're definitely at the front lines. Hub.
Yeah.
That would be another word, because we are a hub to a lot of things, whether it's communication, case management, return to play. Like we're the hub of so many things that I think that kind of goes underlooked. And then the third one, what's the third one? Empathetic, right? You have to have empathy to survive in this profession, to be an effective clinician, because you're working with a human, right? You have to understand their needs, wants, communication styles, and navigate all of those along with the science of clinical decision making and range of motion and special tests. Like, you're still dealing with a human, you're not dealing with a machine. So yeah, front lines, hub, and empathy.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Yeah, no problem. This is fun.
Hopefully the weather gets a little bit more consistent. Maybe not the cold side, but you know. But we'll definitely have you back on. We'll talk about the technology and that you guys are implementing when you get that up and running. And I hope you have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, Shelby.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It is hosted and produced by Shelby Daly, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.